Welcome. This lecture is going to be about the importance of the project appraisal within the structure of a project investment process. Today, we're going to deal with three main items: general considerations, perspective of participants, and concerns of participants. As we will see, the role of participants is crucial within the project appraisal process. General considerations. Project appraisal is mostly about the commitment of scarce resources. Main scarce resource is capital, by definition, speaking about project investment. The second item is related to the expectation of future benefits. Requiring capital implies the need of granting our financiers, our investors, with some benefits. The third item is related to the inherent uncertainties. Different levels of risks could satisfy some of our partners or some investors, or could be very disappointing for other parties. Perspective of participants. First, very important participant is the investor, or better, the investors. People and institutions believing in our project and giving us the necessary capital for delivering the activities. The second type of participants are the financiers. People risking their own capital in order to provide the grants and the means to our organizations. Regulators are also very important. Each activity takes place in a regulated environment, which means that expectations, rules, and recommendations by the regulators are also very important for the conduct of our project. Guarantors. Again, people and institutions spending their own word, their own assets in order to guarantee our own activities. Beforehand and afterwards, the project implementation. Suppliers or privileged partners of our organizations have a very important role too. Concerns of participants. All these participants we've seen so far have different concerns and expectations about the project and the organization itself. Some example. Market concern is related to the demand volatility, meaning that our expectations and hypothesized trends should match the actual situation of the market. Technology could be very unstable. Technology is very important because in project investment, it's one of the main hypotheses about the way activities are going to be carried out in the future. So technology switch or technological transfer could impact in a very massive way on our profitability. Finance. This is another critical item. Finance implies to focus our own attention on returns from the invested capital. Liquidity, meaning that the project itself should guarantee the organization a sufficient cash flow and cash liquidity in order to be solvent towards our creditors. Debt service is related instead to the structure by which we grant our solicitors and we preserve the guarantees for companies, institutions, and individuals believing in the project and trying to finance it. Economy, it's a debatable point. I mean, the economic conditions, the economic general macro conditions are very important if the project is very sensitive towards macroeconomic elements. and items like GDP per capita or expected growth of the country or the region where the project itself is implemented. As we were saying, each participant recognizes different importance to the described items. E.g., 1 could be used for very important as an item. 3, on a scale of 3, could be used as not so important. 2 is by definition a middle perception. This table depicted here shows some examples of concerns. In columns labeled by different capital letters, I, F, R, G, S, we found our participants as we labeled it. So, namely, we have investors, financiers, regulators, guarantors, and suppliers. Depicted in rows, we have the different items we've seen, the main concerns of these participants. So this matrix shows on an horizontal dimension the different actors, and on this vertical line the different items we've dealt with so far. So we can see these numbers here in the table. It could be considered as a declaration of importance or an estimation of importance about these specific items by our participants. So, just to give you an example, market could be very important. Number 1 stands for very important for investor. Could be less important for financiers or regulators. Whereas the same item could be extremely important for regulators, economy, for example, and not so important for the rest of the participants. So if you consider economy here, you can see 4 times the number 3 appearing in these different columns, just number 1 appearing in this column, which is about regulators. This is just an example for stating and confirming the hypothesis that different items and different concerns could be perceived in a different and heterogeneous way by different participants. Sponsor's perspective. Is it compatible with the other investment activities? And is the project potentially bankable? These are the 2 main concerns from the sponsor standpoint. The first one is related to the idea of portfolio. So considering the investment as part of a general organizational activity, it's very important for sponsors to understand whether this specific project is consistent and profitable in this, considering the whole portfolio of activities of the company or the organizations going through the investment process. Meaning that some synergies could be found and exploited among different projects, among different investments present at the same time within the same organization. If synergies could be exploited, means that the organization could reduce its own costs or increase its own incomes, and the end of the story could come up with some additional cash flow. The second item from the sponsor's perspective is related to the bankability of the project. A project is bankable when it's possible to convince a financier, namely a bank or another financial institution, that the project is solid and investors or financiers are eager to invest in it because it's profitable or because it's high expected returns. Third concern, does the project make the best use of sponsors' resources? This is a very important item since It has to do with the allocation of resources within the project activities and within the span and the portfolio of other projects existing at the same time. Best use of resource implies efficiency and efficacy at the same time. So our project, in order to be appraised as a good project, has to show that it's efficient and effective in a balanced way. Does the sponsor have the capacity to energize the project and to retain its momentum in face of obstacles to growth? This is a crucial question as well. Being able to energize the project or to retain its momentum, to sustain its growth, is very important from the sponsor's perspective. In practical terms, this implies that if the sponsor is very convinced about the project, probably is going to be able to profuse his energies in order to boost the project when it's needed, and in order to sustain the advantage that the project is taking, the momentum that the project is gaining in its rollover. Of course, growth is a very generally recognized need for whatever project. So everybody as individual and every company and institution as organizations invest because it is or they are expecting a growth of the project itself and the organization as a whole. Partners' perspectives. As we will see, the partner perspective is very different from the sponsor perspective. When it comes to partners, we can distinguish between local partner and foreign partner. Again, the same typology of actor, a partner, two different sub-items, two different specifications. Being local or being foreigner, considering one project environment. When it comes to local partner, the main concern is about equity. He can afford it is the first scenario. If the local partner trusts the investment, trusts the project undergoing the investment, trusts the fundamentals of the investment, probably is going to state he can afford it. In a different situation, it could come up with something like the exchange rate is wrong, meaning that belonging to different countries and being exposed to different exchange rates could interfere with the sustain that the local partner is giving to the project itself. He wants our market. This could be a concern, a defensive concern by the local partner, seeing the foreigner as an intruder to the local market. Foreign partner, lower price, political and economic risk, low purchasing power in the marketplace. Going a little bit deeper about this foreign partner's perspective, it's pretty clear that the foreign partner is seeking for lower price of activity. It wants to be efficient, it wants to be effective, it's seeking for lower price. One main concern is about the political and economic risk. The political risk, as we will see shortly, is about the stability of the overall government structure and the overall political situation in a country and or in a whatever regional environment. When it comes to economic risk, it could be related both to the macroeconomic risk, which is related to the whole country, and to the microeconomic economic risk, which is related to the specific purpose, to the specific organization, or to the specific environment, micro-environment where the project is taking place. Low purchasing power in the marketplace is about the power that the final entity, which is going to be created or generated or induced by the project activities, is going to have within the local market. So being a foreigner could imply a certain degree of skepticism in entering a brand new market. And this is very likely when the investment is purchased through a greenfield option. Uncertain future earnings. When it comes to earnings, as you know already, it's about the profitability of the investment. So it could be related to cost reduction, to income leveraging, financial aspects, all of them. Being a foreigner trying to enter a brand new market could imply a certain level of uncertainty about the future earnings. This is pretty understandable. And as we will see in the future lectures, this is why it's very important to activate a very effective communication process as well, in order to lower down the perceived uncertainty by the foreign partner. Workers' demands. Another important item is related to the labor market and the expectations of our workers and the way that the investment is going to fulfill these needs and these prospective expectations by personnel. Book value is irrelevant. This could be a very disappointing statement from the foreign partner. When the book value is irrelevant, it means that the assumptions on which the project is going to be based are or could be considered vague, and the foreign partner is not going to trust what is the value of the real assets involved in the project itself. When it comes to the foreign investors' concerns, we have a whole comprehensive list of danger and risks that the foreign investors could take in consideration. The first one is related to the political situation. As I was mentioning, stability, political power, the role of the institution, the role of political economy is very important from a foreign investor perspective. So the investment itself or the project itself could be very promising, but if it's established or is going to be managed in an international environment which is not trusted by the foreign investors, then again the perceived risk could be higher than the actual one, meaning that the foreign investors are asking for higher interest rates in order, or returns in order to invest or to lend money in this initiative. The second item is related to the economic trends. The first two items could be related one to the other, meaning that the political situation is not independent or totally independent from the economic trends, meaning that in a growing and wealthy economy, it's more likely that political situation is going to be stable, whereas in a situation of downturn or crisis, as the financial crisis we're experiencing all over the world since 2008, it's more likely that the political situations could be unstable, that governments could be troubled or put under attack of media or by the foreign investors community. So political situation is about the institutions, economic trends is about the economic system. So if the GDP per capita is growing, it's a good signal in terms of economic trends. If the government is investing in infrastructure, which are the basis for sustainability of advantages, as we will see, is another additional good and positive element to our project appraisal. Monetary and fiscal policy. This is another important item from the foreign investor perspective. Fiscal policy is about taxation and expenditures. So if a government is spending money in a certain activity, if it's giving incentives for the deployment of certain projects, this is a very important element from the foreign investor perspective, meaning that investors from overseas could consider our project attractive because the government is believing in the underneath of it. Monetary policy is about the level of liquidity of the currency or the general currency that the government, the central bank are trying to maintain in a system. It's very important for the inflation, for example. It's very important in terms of actual possibility to access to capital and other monetary resources. Social legislation and evolution. Social legislation is a very complex idea. From the project appraisal perspective, it has to do mainly with the idea of sustainability and responsibility of the organization investing in certain activities compared to the general society, to the general collectivity, to the general community where the organization is operating in. So, social legislation and evolution could be related to the social impact of activities, could be related to the policies and the practice of corporate social responsibility, could be related to the environmental, the physical environmental sustainability of our initiatives, could be related to the end of the story, to the social value that the project and the organization are going to create. Another element that could be related to the social legislation and evolution is about the ease of creating new ventures, the ease of creating new companies, the ease of sustaining and launching new investments. A general indicator for this second interpretation of social legislation and evolution is ranked as ease of business. So foreign investors are concerned about the ease of doing business or the ease of sustaining projects in a certain country, because the easier it is to launch new activities and to create new opportunities, the higher the returns could be, the higher could be the chance to have actual access to these returns, which means earnings at the end of the day. Labor climate and availability are another two additional items which are very important from a foreign investor perspective. Labor climate and availability could be deepened in a twofold way. The first way of dealing with this labor climate is about workers' protection, which is, by definition, related to the strength of workers in terms of defense of their own rights. commonly is related to the strength of the labor unions in a certain country or in a certain environment. So the higher is the protection of workers' rights, the more stable the investment could seem. When it comes to availability, it's instead related to another different aspect, which is also very important from a foreign investor perspective. And namely, and ultimately, it's related to the prevention of the problem of the so-called skill shortage, meaning that the project is scheduled for carrying some activities. The availability of a local workforce able to enact such scheduled activities, it's a critical factor from an appraisal standpoint and from the scale of concern of our foreign investor. Demographics, it's related to the population of the hosting country or the hosting region. Population is very important because it's related to all the items we've seen so far. Population is indirectly related to the labor force, meaning that if we study the present situation in terms of demographics, we could foresee the level of workers, the number of workers in the future years. If we study the individual income, or the distribution of the individual income present, we could be able to foresee the availability of capital, financial capital, in the future. So demographics are related to some very interesting parameters, which are the numbers of population, the age of population, the average income of population, the distribution of these variables among the population, the structure of the clusters that combine and have added one to the other make this population as a whole, and the migration in terms of local distribution of resources, clients, workers, households, and so on, and the geographical distribution of these resources. So if you consider a country with different regions, the average parameters that we could analyze here in terms of labor, climate, and availability, as well as all the items we've seen so far, could be reinterpreted if we consider them in terms of geographical distribution and or population-related items distribution. Financial system. The financial system is very important from a foreign investor perspective because it's the system which is hosting the investment our financiers and our investors are betting on. The recent general crisis or downturn starting in 2008 made it clear that different financial systems could react in different and heterogeneous ways to the same phenomenon. So if the financial system is very defensive, which means with a high level of protection of investors or financiers, this could be considered as an additional guarantee for our investors and financiers, which means that in terms of interest rate, they might be in favor of reducing the price that companies and organizations pay for their capital, which is the interest rate, if the project itself, again, is hosted in a stable financial system. If the financial system is less protective, as the one as we were mentioning, or tolerates wild competition among institutions, then we could have a high risk, high profit, or high return situation that could be encouraging or discouraging for our foreign financial investors, considering their propensity to risk. Attitude towards FDI, foreign direct investments. There is a general attitude for stimulating, hosting, and promoting foreign activities that could be related both to the country as a whole and to the regions and to the single typology of organizations or territory hosting the investment. Again, some country could provide some incentives in order to attract FDI, foreign direct investments, by foreigner institutions. Some countries are very defensive and they discourage the installation of plants and other activities in their own territories. Some countries have a legislation requiring to establish or to set up or to start up a joint venture between a local partner and a foreign partner as a mean and exclusive vehicle for delivering certain activities. So if we're starting from a country A and we want to invest in a country B, it's not given, or we cannot take it for granted that it will be very easy to invest from A to B straightforward. Sometimes we have a lot of legal and formal requirements to be solved. Sometimes we have to go through an alliance, long-term relation, or even a joint venture between an institution from A and an institution from B. Infrastructures are very important in terms of investment appraisal too. Many infrastructures are related to communication, transportation, energy, and all the other systems that could be considered as complementary to the investment and to the company's activity. Infrastructures are very important for supply of basic services for whatever kind of economic activities. Of course, if the initiative, if the project is based on a technology-intensive scheme, infrastructures acquire a higher importance for the project and the company itself. The same for transportation. The availability of infrastructure of transportation is crucial to whatever economic activities, no matter what the industry is. Of course, if we have to install heavy machinery or physical equipment, or we have to ship or deliver physical goods, the physical transportation infrastructures like highways, ports, railway systems acquire a higher importance by definition. The same with energy. With the advent of internet and the development of the so-called virtual infrastructures, physical infrastructures have been replaced or complemented by ICT, information and communication technology infrastructures. So we could have some regions or some countries that are still in a disadvantaged situation in terms of physical infrastructures, but they could be very at the top for the IT infrastructures, which means that if we're dealing with a less developed country situation, it's not given that the physical infrastructure is making our investment profitable. Sometimes it could happen that the availability of IT infrastructures, of information technology infrastructures, and the related skills could replace, to some extent, a lacking situation of physical infrastructures. Living conditions are very important as well. Living conditions are related to the existence of the local community. In terms of project appraisal, the estimate of living conditions is related to the fact that the local population could be part of our staff. Local population is where we pick, select, recruit, incentive our workers, our personnel. Which means that the estimation of the present and future living conditions is crucial for the project appraisal as well. Today, we could be able to hire, compensate, and promote workers for our organizations. Probably in the future 5 years, if the living conditions might change in a specific geographic area, the company, the organization, or whatever institution which is going to invest might be obliged to change some of the aspects related to the investment itself. The level of compensation is one of these. So, if the living conditions of the region we're investing in are expected to grow or to improve, in our investment, we have to plan to increase the salaries of our workers, because today we could be very competitive. We don't know about tomorrow if we're still competing with other competitors, with other organizations, trying to attract the very same workers in their own organizations. Another critical item about project investment appraisal is about the international profile. The international profile is about the country, is about the region, is about the organization which is promoting the investment, which is launching the investment and trying to collect capital about the investment. It's very important to have a good image, a good reputation, to be considered accountable, and it's very important that the investment is related to this general environment. So the structure, the expected profitability of the investment could be influenced by the image of the country or the organization. If the country, if the government, if the financial system is considered solid, stable, and accountable, probably the investment will encounter the favor of the local financial and international financial community. We finish with this lecture for today. For further need and information and deepening, you can refer to our website.